Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to another session of our live through the U.S. Spiritist Federation. We are excited today to have today's speaker, Julio Carvalho. He is going to be this very interesting topic, which is the source of happiness and unhappiness in the spiritual plane. Very interesting. Hey, Julio, good morning. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning, my friend. Good morning to you all.
So before we begin, Julio, let's talk a little bit about what you've been doing lately. So Julio Carvalho, he's the founder and co-director of the Spiritist Center Divine Light in New York, New Jersey. He's a member of the Tri-State Spiritist Federation. He's a trained stationary engineer and licensed clinical social worker. He has a bachelor's in biology and a master's degree in social work at Keene University. He's a psychotherapist for Compassionate Care Hospice. Julio, it's a pleasure for us to have you here and to discuss such an interesting topic. And as usual, let's kick off our conversation with a prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity for us to be here together. Although we are all physically distanced from one another, it is a blessing for us to have the technology that allows us to connect, to share ideas, to have a sense of belonging, a sense of togetherness, despite of any possible roadblocks. Open our minds this morning, open our hearts for the messages that will be sent to us. May we, at the end of our friend's lecture, have a much better understanding of happiness, of sources of happiness and unhappiness in the spiritual world, and especially what we can do from this point on to secure a better future for us. So be it.
So be it.
Thank you, Julio. Have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. I wish to all of you peace in our hearts. The topic chosen for this morning is happiness and unhappiness in the spiritual plane. Before we discuss our topic, I would like to present first the context in which we think of this topic. Because all of us, we carry a...
I apologize,
Yes,
sir. You're breaking up a little bit. There's a little bit of an audio issue.
Unbelievable.
It happens. It happens
Do
the
me a
best
favor,
times in best
Glauco.
life. Yes. I can stick around. I mean,
I know. What you should do, leave your mic unmuted, but lower your mic so no one will hear you.
perfect.
Let's try that trick.
I'm here. Sounds good, sir.
Okay.
I'm here for you.
Any audio issues breaking up now?
That's pretty good.
Okay.
I can hear you quite well.
Excellent. So the context in which one should prepare a topic like this one is thinking of all the possibilities when it comes to people's way of thinking about their future. And most of us, we carry a cultural baggage, which... Are we breaking up?
No, we're fine now.
Perfect. We carry a cultural baggage in which it shapes our worldview, how we see things and how we see everyone else. So what is the spiritual plane that we're talking about? Is this a creation of this philosophy, the Spiritist philosophy? Well, not really. It's not a creation, but rather a revelation. And what is a revelation? A revelation is the removal of a veil. And a veil is something that covers, that obliterates the clear perception of what we want to see, of what we ignore, it exists. So a revelation is the action of removal of whatever is covering what we don't see, our ignorance or our inability to contemplate things there are in the natural world. So the purpose of science is the pursuit of truth. And science seeks for the truth through the process of experimentation. And what we spiritists claim is that the spiritual world is not necessarily a subjective world, but rather a world that is under the natural laws. There is nothing of mystic about this spiritual world. It's a world that is under the natural laws, just like our physical world. So, what that means is that since the pursuit of science is to find truth, is to seek the truth, eventually through experimentation, and this is pure speculation that I'm doing right now, in the realm of TV transmission and signal transmission, one day the scientists, by trying to improve more and more our signals, will eventually detect the spiritual world. And once the scientists detect the spiritual world, it would be revealed to us this realm that we are in, because the physical world is inside the spiritual world. The spiritual world is not down or up, left or right. We are inside the spiritual plane. And by our means of improving our signal strength, our signal sensibility through scientific means, we will detect the spiritual world. And this would be fascinating for all of us, for humanity, because we will step forward into the path of progress. Because the belief of afterlife will cease to be a belief, but rather a scientific fact. We will no longer say that I believe that life continues, but we will affirm to ourselves that we know that life continues, because we will detect the presence of those who are in the spiritual plane, in this realm that it's all around us, and we'll be able to communicate with them, maybe by a means of a futuristic TV set, but we'll be able to have conversations with those who have crossed to this other side. It's not even an another side, it is this side, but in a different vibrational mode. We'll be able to have conversations with them and have videos of them just the same way we have today through our technological means. And all of us at that point will no longer say that I believe in the afterlife, but we know that the afterlife exists. We will finally understand that we are not the body, but we are conducting this machine. We are driving this vehicle. We are inside this biological envelope, but we are not it. It's something that we have, but it's not who we are. We are a thinking being that outlives when this machine, through its natural process, decays into atom, through the process of decomposition to form new organic beings in nature. And this would be a breakthrough for humanity, that we find out truly that we all go on. We move forward. Life continues. And then we'll find out what is happiness and unhappiness, not only here on this physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm. What is happiness and unhappiness composed of? And when we talk about happiness and unhappiness, most people can't avoid of thinking of punishments and rewards, as if there is a supreme intelligence, as if there is a being known as God punishing people and rewarding people. Is that what occurs? Do we have a being that rewards and punish people, well, that really doesn't exist. What does exist is a natural law created by the supreme intelligence. And whenever we infringe this natural law, the consequence of this infringement, it's pain, it's suffering, it's misery. This natural law, it's not overseen by spiritual beings trying to enforce it. The natural law exists in its natural state with no need of reinforcement. This is not necessarily like a civil law that needs police reinforcement in order for the law to be applicable to all individuals. Natural laws are there regulating our behavior. I'll give you an example. For example, if you overeat, if one eats in excess, what's going to happen? Well, we get sick. Now, the reason we get sick, it's not because God is telling our stomach, be sick because I want to punish this individual for overeating. That's not what is occurring. What is occurring is that the stomach has its limits. This machine has its biological limits. And whenever one breaks that limit, the natural consequence is pain, is misery, is suffering. So that's where unhappiness comes from. Unhappiness comes from the fact that we're trying to break an unbreakable law. We are trying to infringe a law that cannot be broken. And whenever we attempt to break this law, we have pain, suffering, misery instead. So God is not watching us 24/7 to analyze each of our behavior in order to punish us for what we're doing. Instead, there is a natural law that permeates the entire universe that regulate these excesses. So whenever one abuses the natural law, we have a consequence of that natural abuse. Now, when we have a consequence of the abuse we have done to the natural law, is it punishment? Is the goal of this law is to punish us? Is that what a punishment is about? The necessity to make us suffer because we have done something wrong? Not at all. That's another misconception. God does not punish. The natural law does not punish. This is not necessarily punishment for the sake of punishment. What we have is a system of balances and checks in which the purpose of this natural system, of this natural law, is to draw us towards perfection, towards our goal. So whenever we break a natural law, the purpose of the pain that we feel behind this natural law is to educate us, is to help us to develop our discernment, our ability to choose what's right and what is not right. That is the purpose of the so-called punishment. It's not to make us suffer, but rather to educate us, to develop our discernment, our ability to choose what is healthy for us. That's what the goal of this law is all about. So whenever I break a law, for example, I overeat, I am not being punished, but rather I'm being educated. It is very unpleasant education, but it is it is nonetheless education, because the goal is to help us to make a discernment. Now, why is it that unfortunately most people, they learn through pain and through suffering? Well, that's because we are first invited by these natural laws to learn through the path of love. And whenever we disregard the invitation to learn through the path of love, we consequently invite pain as a means to learn exactly the same lesson that love was trying to teach us. For example, let's say someone is 17 years old and they begin to smoke. And here comes the natural law trying to help this individual avoid this destructive habit. So his mother comes to him and says, "You know, my son, I love you. Why are you making this choice? There's nothing good that comes from smoking. You're just destroying your body." Maybe the girlfriend of this guy will come up to him and say, "You know, I don't like when you smoke. You know, when I kiss you, I could taste the nicotine. It's terrible." Maybe the same individual goes to see a movie, and in this movie, there is a subliminal message that tells them, you know, do not smoke. Even when they purchase cigarette, it says right there, you know, this can lead to lung cancer. So these are different methods of trying to educate someone through the path of love. And why is it the path of love? Because it doesn't hurt to listen to these people and these messages that seemingly care about our well-being. But let's say this individual becomes very stubborn, and through his stubbornness, he does not listen to all these different advices and counseling. So what's going to happen? Well, as he inhales the nicotine, and the lung was not made to absorb nicotine, there is a natural process. This is not punishment. This is not induced infliction. It's simply a natural cause. The alveolus, these are small sacs in your lung that exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen in order to supply your blood with oxygen. You know, they will start to develop all different sorts of ailments. And eventually, there will be a tumor that will grow inside a person's lung. And now they're 40, maybe in their early 50s, and they start coughing, and nothing helps them to stop that cough. And eventually, they will see a medical doctor, and the doctor would take an x-ray and would detect the lung cancer. So this doctor would say to this individual, unfortunately, now either you stop smoking or you continue to smoke. However, you're going to die anyway within few months. What do you choose to do? And most likely, it's been my experience working in hospice that immediately they'll quit smoking. And as that disease progresses, you know, they become very fearful of how they're going to die. Because when you can't breathe, the sensation that you have is as if you are drowning. If someone threw you in water and you can't grasp for air. Now, just this past Thursday, one of my patients died of lung cancer. And his wife was so upset with this guy. You know, whenever I went there, she, you know, released her stress by telling me how angry she was with him, because he just retired 7 months ago. And this was the period in their life they could enjoy their retirement. They could use their savings in order to do what most people like to do when they retire, you know, to travel. But here he was connected with an oxygen tank 24/7 and waking up in the middle of the night because he couldn't breathe. So she was very angry at him because they spent most of their marriage life fighting over cigarettes. So he died, and she was still very angry at him, even though he died. So, but he did quit smoking. You know, when the minute he heard that diagnosis, he quit smoking. Now, why did he quit smoking? Because here came pain to teach him something that love attempted to get across, but he never paid any attention to it. He died because of out of his stubbornness. And he realized this because in those few months of going through the lung cancer, and that tumor was growing and growing and growing, and he couldn't, you know, his ability to breathe was gradually diminished by the size as the tumor grew. So his diminishment, his ability to breathe properly. He regretted so much spending his health on cigarettes. And not only he wasted a lot of money, but he wasted one of the most important things that you cannot buy with money, which is your health. Of course, he will give up his own house just to have a new lung, but that's not possible. So he died. So here it is, the lesson of pain. The purpose of pain, the objective of pain, it's not to punish. So God has established the natural law, and God does not punish anyone. The law is right there in order for us to align ourselves with the law, in order to progress, in order to move forward. And whenever we get stuck because of our own stubbornness, whenever one chooses to try to break this unbreakable law, here comes pain. And what is the purpose of pain? What is the message of pain? Well, let's say I place my hand on a fire, and I keep my hand there on that fire. What's going to happen? Of course, it's going to burn. And it burns because I have on the palm of my hand these special nerve endings called nociceptors. And the purpose of the nociceptors is to detect pain. So when I place my hand on a fire, immediately these nociceptors, they send a command to my nerves in my arm, and the nerves in my arm send a command to the muscles in my arm to remove my hand from the fire. And the body is so protective of itself that this happens without my awareness. My arm is actually moved from the fire even before the message gets to my brain. And why this occur? Because the message of pain, which tells me in this example that I should change the location of pain. So whenever we experience pain in life, whenever there is misery, whenever there is suffering, there is a message being conveyed to us. And the message is of change. We should change our perception. One should change our actions. And that's where, my friends, we find ourselves in the spiritual plane feeling either happy or unhappy. So what is the nature of our happiness and unhappiness in the spiritual plane? Now that we know that there's no God waiting for us either to punish us or to reward us for what we have done. It's all based on what we have done. Well, there are 6 sources of unhappiness in the spiritual plane. First source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane, in the spiritual plane. Once we disengage ourselves from the body, and after we become stable again, to become aware of what life is all about, we understand that this planet, just like any other planet, it's nothing but a school for the ascendancy of the soul. Our mission, our purpose, while we are in this flesh, is to empower ourselves intellectually and morally, is to become smarter individuals and at the same time, virtual individuals. That is our goal, to develop our morality, to develop our intelligence. So once we find ourselves in the spiritual plane, we look back at our lives and we realize that what we have done instead, we have done wrong. We have caused bad things to other people. So that becomes the source of unhappiness, number 1. The bad that we have done towards other people. Whenever we do something bad to someone else, the pain we have inflicted on others, that pain comes back right to us. And that becomes a source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane. And this topic itself, just to, if we limit ourselves to talk about this one source of unhappiness, we could go on through an entire day of seminar just to discuss about this source of unhappiness, because there is a multitude of ways in which we can inflict pain on others, in which we can cause bad things to other people. But that is the source of unhappiness, number one. Source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane, number two. The good that we have not done. So in the spiritual plane, we have a different point of view of what life is all about. We understand that we are under the law of solidarity, which means we work together for a common cause. And once we find ourselves in the spiritual plane, if one has realized that we have not done the good that we could have done, this is a source of unhappiness. And why is that? Well, that's because we found out that our happiness is directly proportional to the happiness that we provide to others. I'll repeat that, because if we can understand this concept alone from this talk, we have really taken profit of the time spent here together. Our happiness is directly proportional to the happiness that we provide to others. So if I find myself in the spiritual plane, realizing that I could have done good, but I didn't. In other words, I had many opportunities to create my happiness, but then I didn't. I regret very much. And this regret, it is a great source of unhappiness. Maybe for some of you, you might think that this concept, it's a little bit elusive, but think in terms of our educational system. The purpose of college, ideally, the purpose of college should be to help us establish our profession, is to help us to have a career so we can guarantee a roof over our head. There are many reasons why we go to college, but one of the main ones is so we can secure our finances. So let's say someone spends 4 years in college. Now they are senior in college and they're doing terrible. Their grade is just awful. They're getting D's and F's, and they realize they're not going to be able to graduate. So when the end of the 4th year comes up, they fear very much graduation, because they're not going to graduate. So they look back, and what is the emotion that they have? Regret. I could have done so differently. I could have used these 4 years in order to empower myself, in order to secure my finances through a good education, but I wasted my opportunity. So this sense of wasting an opportunity, it's a great source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane. Source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane, number 3. And that is the bad that have resulted from the good left undone. I'll repeat that for you. The bad that have resulted from the good left undone. When one does not do the good we're supposed to do, usually the result will be something bad. For example, when one is responsible for a child, the purpose of a parent is to prepare that child for life, and not to prepare that child as if the child would stay with the parents forever. That's not what happens. So what goes on, unfortunately, for some families, is that they leave their children completely uneducated. The children might have instructions, but not education. What's the difference? When a child goes to school, they receive a good instruction. But education, however, it's something that you receive at home. It's the collection of habits that someone has. Someone have. So let's say a child always never clean their bedroom. A child, whenever plays with their toys, they never clean after them. a child becomes very lazy. So this is one habit that I am instilling in my child. And if I allow all these sets of unhealthy habits in a child, that child would have a very poor education, because we all have education. Sometimes you look at someone and you say, well, this person has no education. Well, everybody has an education, but some people have poor education, others have good education. And what is education again? Education, from the Spiritist philosophy point of view, it's the set of good habits that we instill in someone. So if I allow that child to be very undisciplined, what is to be undisciplined is to misuse time. That child will grow to give all sorts of problems. If I allowed my child's selfishness to go unchecked, that child would be a selfish adult. And most likely, as a selfish adult, I, as a father, I, as a mother, when I get old, they will probably care less so much about me. I'll give you an example. In our Spiritist Center, every Sunday, we used to go to 3 different nursing homes. It was 2 nursing homes, and one of the other place was for those who have some sort of a mental disorder. And when we began this work back in 1999, we were so naive and inexperienced. We judged the children of those elderly that we saw, because in our mind we thought to ourselves, who in the world would leave their parents to places like this? I am not referring to all people or all nursing homes. I'm referring to those 3 particular places we went to. But as we gained experience, we learned something much different. We learned that these people who were there completely abandoned. They had no visits. They were orphaned parents of living children. We learned that as the children were growing up, they told their children, all I want from you is to become a lawyer. All I want from you is for you to become a doctor, is for you to become an engineer. And as a result, their children grew up to have those skills, become a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, but not a caring child, because that's never what they heard. I'm not justifying the children's behavior, but the parents left their children's selfishness unchecked. They never told them what they were supposed to do when it comes to the matters of the heart. So now they are reaping the bad that resulted from the good left undone. So in the spiritual plane, when we realize we could have done so much good, yet we didn't, that becomes a source of pain. But also, when we realize the bad that have resulted from the good we didn't do, that torments us even more. And for all the spiritists who are listening to this, no other set of philosophy, no other train of thought, no other cultural belief has more information about the spiritual plane than we do. That does not make us special human beings. It does not grant us special rights, just the opposite. The more responsibility, the more information we have, the more responsible we become. Our actions or our lack of actions towards the good, it is directly proportional to the amount of knowledge that we have of the things that we should have done. We know that the purpose of our reincarnation is to better ourselves, and we better ourselves by serving our community, by serving others. The effort that I do to help other people, it is the result of my own progress. If I do not make any efforts, I have no progress. The information that the Spiritist philosophy gives us does not grant us special right. Allan Kardec, the codifier of the Spiritist philosophy, was wise enough to ask this question because the topic that we're covering today lies on the fourth part of the Spirit's book. This is the book that us Spiritists guide our train of thought together with the knowledge that we have of science. And he asked the highly evolved entities that particular question. If knowing Spiritism, does that guarantee our happiness? Not necessarily. Spiritism makes us better informed, but to be better informed, that does not mean that immediately translates into action. We have to have the effort. We have to place in actions. We have to transform into actions our knowledge. So what secure our happiness in the spiritual plane is actually the good that we have done towards other people, regardless if we believe in God, if we believe in Christ, if we even care about natural laws. What counts are the good that we have done. So we Spiritists are endowed with more information, and that makes us more responsible if we don't fulfill our obligation. I'm not trying to impose on others that you should now go around your neighborhood and try to transform other people, because that is not the goal. The goal is to transform ourselves. Is to truly pay attention to our imperfections and do our best to overcome our negative tendencies. According to Allan Kardec, in chapter 17 of the Gospel according to Spiritism, Be Perfect, in the third paragraph, in the third lesson of that chapter, true Spiritists are those who make an effort to be better than yesterday, to be better tomorrow than it's today. It's to make an effort. And I love this definition because Allan Kardec does not say that in order for us to be a true Spiritist, one should not have any imperfections. Well, we will experience the emotions derived from our imperfections for a long time. But when I make a true effort to curb those emotions and act in the right way instead of giving in to my emotions, that, my friends, become a true means of becoming a Spiritist. So it's the effort that we make. So that is the goal. We should make the best effort in order to curb our negative tendencies, in order for us to prevent these negative tendencies to show up in our actions. The fourth source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane is attachments to earthly passions. And what do I mean by this? Well, we are here on this physical plane with a single goal: to develop our intellect, to develop our morality. And whenever we think that we are here to stay forever, we become very attached to everything. It's like going to a vacation. While you are in vacation, if you become super attached to where you are in your vacation, when it's time to go home, the more attached you are at that vacation place, the harder it will be for you to return home. And you'll probably make your return super painful just because one have become so attached to that vacation place, to what the vacation can offer to us. So here on earth, we're not on vacation, but we are here temporarily. We are just transitioning through this physical plane. And if I attach myself to the things of this physical plane, when the moment of detachment arrives, which we call death, the more attached I am, the more difficult will be the detachment. So what should we do? Well, while we're here, We should do our best to progress, to move forward by all means, including financial means. In Spiritism, we do not learn that we have to be poor in order to be an evolved spirit. What we learn is that we have to be detached from material things. It is very natural for us to actually want to better ourselves by increasing our financial gain. It's a very natural feeling. If this feeling, if this need inside us wasn't there, we would still be living in caves, in the as we were in the Neolithic age. But that's not the goal. It's not to be poor, to be evolved, to be detached, and to live on the streets because I'm not attached to material things. That is a misunderstanding of all this. One can be very useful. One can grow and progress in any social condition we find ourselves in. And what we need to strive for is to be detached from these material things, because when the moment of detachment comes, the more attached we are, the more painful the detachment process is. Sorry. So as we find ourselves in the spiritual plane, and because we are no longer are in a physical body, everything that we attach to ourselves to become a great source of torment. For example, if my attachment is cigarettes, but I have no cigarettes in the spiritual plane, that becomes a great source of torment. If my attachment is to alcohol, there is no alcohol in the spiritual plane, that becomes a great source of torment. If I'm attached to my house, but when I get to the spiritual plane, that house is sold to someone else because I cannot take my house with me. So now I am tormented with the vision of people actually invading my home. All of us have heard stories of tormented houses. Well, that could be, I'm not saying all cases, but that could be individuals who used to live there, and because they have crossed to the other side, they do not want to abandon their place of home. If I'm attached to my profession, if I'm attached to my wife and to my children to the point that I believe they belong to me instead of knowing that they are just with me, all that can become extremely painful. So one might ask, how then should we live? Should we live? Well, we should live by loving, taking care while it's under our temporary possession, but not attaching it to ourselves, because that moment of detachment will come and it will be very painful, to the proportion that the more attached I am, the more difficult the detachment process will be. So that topic, once again, itself, we could spend many hours talking about it, because there are all sorts of material attachments and there are all sorts of moral attachments. Our talk for today, it's nothing but a synthesis of all these deep issues that concern all of us. Fifth source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane, and that is seeing happy people. In the spiritual plane, we will look at those who have fulfilled their obligation. And those individuals, they experience a source of peace, happiness, that it's very hard to describe. And when we contemplate them, when we see that they're happy, that, my friend, intensifies our unhappiness. Let's bring this topic to the college analogy I gave before. So let's say I'm in the end of my fourth year and I have messed up big time. I've taken F's and D's. And then here comes the graduation day. I obviously don't graduate, but I see a friend of mine, I see people who I've known in different classes, they are graduating. And after the graduation, they get an excellent job because now they have earned the credentials by finishing school. So when I look at them and I have to find myself a job that does not correspond to what I wanted, when I look at them, that becomes a great source of unhappiness to myself. So in the spiritual plane, we look at those who have earned their happiness. And that showed to us that the reason we are not unhappy, it's because we lost the opportunity. A very important concept to understand is that nothing is given to us. Everything is a process of earning. In the spiritual plane, the kind of government, if I might say so, it's called meritocracy. It's government by merit. You earn through your own effort. You enjoy the things that you have due to the result of your own effort. Nothing is given to you. If there is a great myth that we hear all the time, is that we are all equal. Well, no, we're not. God created us all equal, but we are not equal because what we have done with our choices and opportunities actually have differentiated us from one another. So once you go to the spiritual plane, you get what you deserve. You don't get what everybody else is getting. There is no socialist government in the spiritual plane that wants to make everybody equal and give everybody the same privileges. Nobody has privileges. We earn through our own effort. We are responsible for our own actions. The more you do, the more you get. The less you do, the less you get. No one is removing what I have earned to give to someone else. It doesn't work that way. And we have this utopia trying to be established here by some philosophies to remove what some people have earned to give those to who does not want to have the effort of earning for themselves. So we are presented with the same opportunities, but what we do with those opportunities completely differentiate us from one another. And the spiritual plane, we find that in a very hard way. And when we look at those who have done the effort, they have done the job, they have done their part, they have worked to earn what they have in the spiritual plane, that becomes a source of unhappiness because we realized it were all in our hands and we failed to do. Sixth source of unhappiness in the spiritual plane, and that is anxiety of our future. Because once we learn the things that we should have done but we didn't do, we learn that God, in its infinite wisdom and love, have created all of us to perfection, for perfection. And as a result, all of us have many opportunities to achieve our perfections. And these opportunities are also known as reincarnations, which is the action of re-entering the flesh. So we as a spirit re-enter this material being as many times as is needed for us to attain perfection. So the goal for all of us is the same. What goal is that? Perfection, sublime happiness, sublime knowledge that we have no idea yet what it is. But then you might ask, well, if we're all going to get there, so we are all equal. No, we are not, because the time that it takes us to enjoy this source of happiness is completely up to each individual. So I can make my trip very long. I can make my journey very difficult, full of turns and twists, unnecessary downhills and uphills. Or I can make this journey a straight line, which is the shortest point, which is the shortest distance from 2 points, from ignorance to knowledge, from immorality to goodness. It's completely up to my own efforts. to my own use of free will. And this is where pain becomes so useful, because whenever I divert myself from that straight path, here comes pain, not as a source of punishment, but as a light, but as a signal telling me go back to the straight path. That is the message. Change the course to go back to the straight path. So I have summarized, my friends, and believe me, this is a very short summary of the 6 sources of unhappiness in the spiritual plane. The bad that we have done, the good that we could have done, the bad that have resulted from the good left undone, attachment to earthly possessions, contemplation of other people who are happy, and anxiety of the future. Why we have anxiety of the future? Because now we know that our future is in direct proportion to the things we have done in our past. And if our past is not so productive, what we have ahead of us, it's a very hard type of education, because we will receive the opportunities to mend for our mistakes. Once again, we will receive the opportunities to correct our past. And it's a source of unhappiness because many people in the spiritual plane, they realize they have failed multiple times in these attempts. So they dread their future because they think they might fail again. And that will create more suffering for themselves, because the more one prolongs the amendments of our mistakes, the more pain we cause for ourselves. So that in itself, it's unnecessary suffering. It's the result of our bad choices. But what is, in the spiritual plane, the source of happiness? Well, it's very hard for us to describe the source of happiness in the spiritual plane. Reason being, it's because we're talking about the future. And to talk about the future, it's very hard to predict. I'll give you a small, tiny example. Who could have predicted all the technological advancements that we are now enjoying today? If you go back just 50 years ago, which is nothing in history, it is so hard to predict the life that we're having right now. Many futurists, they completely get it wrong. When you watch movies, for example, what you see are people using a regular phone booth with a TV screen. People did not thought of having a cell phone and actually seeing people through the cell phone. What they thought of was a improved phone booth system. So people still were standing by a phone booth and they were attached, to the floor, but there was a TV screen over there. So it's very hard to predict the future. But one of the things we can definitely deduce from this future is that if one of the sources of unhappiness are our passions, for example, jealousy, envy, pride, selfishness, if we lack those, then automatically we are experiencing happiness. Because if I don't have selfishness within me, it means I have full of solidarity in me, and solidarity brings me happiness. So one source of happiness in the spiritual plane is the lack of material passions. Second source of happiness in the spiritual plane, being useful. And the highly evolved spirits, they know their purpose, and their purpose is to elevate us, is to help us move ahead. So you have a special friend that takes care of you, a being that is more evolved than you, who is responsible in part to tell you what you should do. This being will not do the job for you, but it will only advise you. It will only counsel you. It's up to you to listen to his or her suggestion and step forward in the spiritual plane, in the spiritual life. This being, we call it guardian angel, but the name is of least importance. But we know we have this being, and the source of happiness for this being is being useful, is helping you, regardless of the outcome of your own actions. Because when we make a mistake and now we suffer from the consequences of this mistake, the being is not miserable because it knows that that pain has an educational purpose. Obviously, when we make the right decision after listening to his or her counseling, that it is in itself a source of stimulus for them to continue to help us. But the point is, they will help us regardless. And if we constantly reject their counseling by closing our spiritual ears, now, they would not give up on us, but they will surely respect our free will because they know we have chosen the path of pain, and pain will eventually change us. It doesn't have to be this way, it's the result of our stubbornness. So this being is there to help you. And there are beings who are responsible for cities. There are beings who are responsible for states and for countries. And their source of happiness is to help, is to be useful, is to know that they are an instrument of the natural laws to reinforce progress. And that will result in love, that will result in all different kinds of progress for us here on this material plane. And the third source of happiness for these spirits is to know the laws of the universe, is to know what exists and to take part on them. Now, can we even think of what a highly evolved world looks like? What is their social condition, their daily activities? We can only imagine. And our imagination will not ever make justice to what truly happens in these elevated spheres. And this is what they experience. And this happiness of them was not given by God. This is not a reward that they have as if it's a gift, as if it's a present that were given to them. No, they earned it. They worked for it. It's the result of their own effort. We might say that God, through the natural laws, provided the conditions and the means to all of us. And some people make good use of this, other people don't. So in the spiritual plane, there are no favoritisms. We are all looked upon. We all are loved and cared for, but our wishes, either to abide by the law or not to abide by the law, are fully respected. But then we have to go through the natural consequences of our own decision. So Spiritism, it's a philosophy that places the responsibility of our future in our laps. No one is responsible for our happiness or unhappiness besides ourselves. Thank you so much for listening.
Julio, what a great topic! And the things that I liked about your discussion was the fact that you emphasized that it's not a punishment, right? It's just due to action and reaction, which is a universal law. So it just makes sense. Very, very interesting. Of course, we have several questions here, and let's get started with the questions. What happens to suicides after disincarnation? That's an awesome question. Almost straight out of the book Heaven and Hell.
The topic of suicide is covered in the Spirit's book, in the fourth part of the Spirit's book, which is entitled Solace and Consolation. And in the first chapter of that fourth part of the Spirit's book, the earthly sorrows and joys, we have the topic of suicide. And what we understand is that the motives for someone to destroy their biological machine are innumerable. So the source of unhappiness for suicide is directly proportional to what led them to make that decision. But if there is one common theme, if there is one common emotion that all suicides experience, according to the Spiritist philosophy, it's disillusionment. And what is disillusionment? Well, the prefix dis means without, And illusionment means an illusion, some fake idea we have created in our mind. It's an illusion. And why they are disillusioned in the spiritual plane? Because the motive for anyone who commits suicide is to lessen their pain. They're trying to move away from whatever is disturbing them. So they attempt to destroy themselves by destroying their body to relieve themselves from the pain they are suffering. So the disillusionment comes when they arrive in the spiritual plane and they find that the pain that caused them to make this very ignorant decision, it's still there, but now is multiplied by the fact that they have realized they lost an opportunity. Whatever was causing their pain, this was not necessarily to inflict misery on them, but an opportunity to help them develop their potential as spirits, and they dump that opportunity in the garbage. So we can safely say that all of them experience disillusionment. But what are the details of each suicide's pain? Well, that we have to consider. In any case, what we call aggravational points and points that can attenuate the pain. So if I make a mistake, what are the things that can attenuate the consequences of my mistake? Well, how ignorant I was of my own decision, the people who have influenced me while I was making that decision, all sorts of difficulties that influenced me to get to that decision. And what aggravates the consequence of my decision? Well, how much knowledge I had about what I was supposed to do. Was this just a lack of courage, or was pure cowardice? What is cowardice? The lack of the will to confront our own problems and hardships. So the details, it varies to infinity, because people's experience in life, it's very unique to each one's need of progress and development.
Very interesting. And it's funny that you answered it in line with the 6 points, I believe, or the second point, the regret for the missed opportunities. Very interesting. Thank you, sir. What did the spirit in the last 6 months or 6 minutes realization before death? That is, the wrong done to themselves, the good not done to others, and the bad or frustration done to others, as it did not take the good path. More suffering of this realization or sort of consolation? What to do in the midst of this realization? So it's the question about the last moments of the spirit.
I am not sure I comprehended the question per se, but Allan Kardec asked this question, I believe is question 971. What do people experience in the moment of death? And the answer goes, for those who are hard-hearted, they experience doubt. For the people who have done bad, they experience fear. And for the people who have done good, they experience hope. Now, of course, there are an infinite amount of variables in these three conditions, but it has been my personal experience working in hospice. And just for those of you who are not aware of hospice it's a service, it's a psychotherapeutic service in order to bring someone who's dying at the hospital so they could die at the comfort of their home, because no one wants to die home. They want to die with their cats, with their dogs, surrounded by their family. So a nurse goes in, a psychotherapist goes in, and we try to provide palliative care. We're no longer doing anything to treat, for example, the tumor or the cancer, but any of the symptoms that might derive from that tumor, it's being controlled by narcotics. So the person is symptom free. So it's been my personal experience that those who have fulfilled their obligations, despite what their beliefs are in the afterlife, they're very serene. They are welcoming this moment of their existence. You can tell by the look in their eye that they are peaceful. They are literally ready to die. And some of them, they literally tell me, I do not want to commit suicide, but I had enough of living. I have lived enough. I'm ready to go. And there are those who completely have abandoned their responsibility. For these people, they are not welcoming at all uh, this moment, and it shows in their faith. You could tell how concerned and preoccupied they are. I never forget this guy. He was 53 years old, and once I met him, he was skin over bones. That's how thin he was. And when I say he was skin over bones, I'm not exaggerating. All you see is skin over bone because the cancer has eaten the person away. You could see all the bones in their collar. And I went in, and it's a very long story. I'm just trying to summarize the story. But he said when he was 20 years old, he wanted to become a musician. And so he left his wife, he left his children just to become a musician. And what he meant by that was to, I want to live the nightlife. I did not want all these responsibilities. But then once he was into his 50s, he had done much damage to this biological machine with all the drinking and the drugging. And one of the consequences of this was that he developed prostate cancer, and the prostate cancer took over, and it got into a point in which his friends were gone because they were never there to begin with. And he had no one except his ex-wife to call. So he called the ex-wife, and this angel on earth took this guy in after all he did to her. So when I first met him, he calls me and he says, do you think I'm in pain? So I look around, and he has morphine, Percocet, Dilaudid. He had all this powerful narcotic to control his pain. And he says, of course, a person with your diagnosis must experience a lot of pain. And he says, that's true. However, the pain that I experience from the regret, from the embarrassment of leaving my wife, it is way greater than the physical pain I'm experiencing right now. So this guy will be in a lot of pain. And this is why, our meetings, we meet with the doctors and the nurses and every 2 weeks to discuss each patient. And when someone dies, the nurse says, for example, the patient died peacefully in the comfort of their home. And when they ask me, I say the patient died pain-free in the comfort of their home. So one day they asked me, Julio, why don't you say that the patient died peacefully like everybody else? And I said, well, because the word peace, it means the absence, of disturbing thoughts. And we experience peace when one fulfills our obligation. That's where peace comes from. Peace is the result of our obligations. It's not something that is imposed by governments. It's not a sign that a religious authority can do on you so you can feel at peace. Peace is the byproduct of fulfilling our duties. So when someone fulfills their duties, like mothers who have dedicated themselves to their children, to the life of their family, and I see in their eyes how peaceful they are. That person I write, the patient died peacefully. But for those individuals who have not fulfilled their obligation, they might have died with physically pain-free, but emotionally, morally, I know they haven't, because they told me. I'm not making a deduction here. I'm not deducing anything. They are telling me I am disturbed. I am suffering psychologically. So what we feel at the moment of death, 6 minutes, 6 months, 6 years, is directly proportional to how we have lived our lives. If we have made a decision, let's say that 6 months before my death, I make a decision to transform myself, I immediately will experience a glimpse of peace. Not the entire peace, but the glimpse of peace. The best way to describe what I'm trying to say is as if you are inside a cave and you're walking towards inside the cave. And as you're walking towards inside the cave, you are distancing yourself from the light. The minute you make a decision to turn yourself away from inside the cave and now you're facing the outside of the cave, you're not yet outside of the cave, but you have glimpse of the light bathing your face. You can already see some of the light, and that gives you hope. It gives you resilience. It gives you motive for you to continue on that good path. Same thing here. If I realize I had an existence full of mistakes, until 6 months before my death, when I make that decision to start make amends in my mind, in my actions, in my words, I have faced the light of the entrance of the cave, and I begin to bathe myself with light. And of course, the more I walk towards the entrance of the cave, the more light I am being bathed by. In other words, the more effort I make to make my amendments, the more peace I will experience. Now, let me explain a very important concept. Peace is not directly followed by happiness. These are two different things. Peace is the fulfillment of our obligation. Happiness is the joy we experience for something that is occurring to us. So sometimes we fulfill our duties, but that does not lead to happiness. For example, someone might have an inclination to cheat on their wives. It's a negative tendency. They want to be with another woman, but then they refrain that emotion and they don't do it. They are in peace because they didn't do it. But are they happy with that decision? Not yet, because it's not what they want to do. They did something out of obligation. Someone could be at a job and then they see some money lying around. So they are tempted to take that money away, but then they refrain themselves from taking that money away and they experience peace. I have fulfilled my obligation. I could go home tonight and put my head in the pillow and sleep with my conscience free of any guilt. But are they happy? Probably not just yet, because they're thinking of all the things they could do with the money. So happiness does not immediately follow peace. We have to keep ourselves that.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I think it's the third time that I hear that example from you, and every time it's from a different perspective. So thank you for sharing it again. We have more questions. How much the more we know, the more responsible we are concept influences our happiness in the spiritual world?
Well, if we have a 3-year-old who knocks a glass on the milk right on the carpet, and we have a 5-year-old who does the same thing, we have a 10-year-old, unfortunately, who actually does the same thing, and a 17-year-old who actually spills milk on the floor, who is more responsible? Of course, the teenager. Then the kid with 10 years old. Then the kid with 5 years old. And then the kid who is 3 years old, given that they all have mental instability and there is no biological conditioning impacting their judgment. So the more we are aware, the more we become responsible. Responsibility comes with knowledge. This is something that we learn as well in the Spirit's book, when Allan Kardec asked if morality is followed by intellect. And no, it's not. We develop our intellect first, and then we develop our morality. But the development of our intellect helps along the way to develop morality, because we become more aware of what's right and wrong. But morality development does not immediately follow our intellectual development. So the same applies when we are in the spiritual plane. The more we become aware, the more responsible we are. Now, sometimes it's hard for people to comprehend these subjects, these concepts, because there is such attachment to God as being an individual, as being a being of some sort who is waiting for us to ask us, have you done this? Have you done that? Julio, well, you read this book and now you did these things. We are so attached to the personification of God that it becomes an obstacle for us to understand these concepts. In reality, we do not know what God is. Of course, we know the answer from the Spirit's book. Question number one, what is God? God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. But that answer, it's not answering much because we don't know what is the nature of God. We lack the senses and the perception to understand the nature of God. And Emmanuel, who is the spiritual guide of a very well-respected medium for all of us, Francisco Xavier, he says on the book that carries his name, Emmanuel, that spirits of his hierarchy have no clue what God is. This is very profound because sometimes we speak with such intimacy with God as if he's a friend just sitting around having coffee with us. And so we personify God. And the more a person we make out of God, the God less is for us. So we make these mistakes in trying to understand these concepts. So how does it affect our own knowledge of spiritual things in our happiness and unhappiness in the spiritual plane? Well, it's us that beat us up with the emotion of regret or guilt. Let's say I have stolen from someone. And once I find myself in the spiritual plane, that disturbs me. I wake up in the spiritual plane. It takes me some time to get stable mentally, psychologically, and it takes me some time to understand what life is all about. And once I become aware of what life is about, I regret. I suffer from the regret of making that mistake. But what alleviates my regret is the fact that I can tell myself, oh, I had no idea that this was a mistake. I saw my father doing it. I saw my uncle doing it. I saw the governor doing it. I saw the mayor doing it. We heard of such a scandalous throughout Brazil of people who were using the federal money to buy oxygen, to buy the oxygen machine, and they were hidden the oxygen machine behind the wall just to have the need to buy more oxygen machine. And these oxygen machines were overpriced in order to, this is pure corruption, in order for them to pocket that federal money that was going completely unchecked. So, I saw everybody doing this, is why I did it. So that alleviates their regret. But someone who actually studied law, someone who learned from the get-go, from their religious tradition, from their family, that stealing is just wrong. You're there, any position that you find yourself in, you earn your money honestly. And just imagine when we talk about mayors and governors, it's politics, it's a very well-respected thing to do. Unfortunately, for those who have some ideology, they ended up corrupting themselves, the people, and distort what politics should be about. And they do all these sorts of things. So when they find themselves in the spiritual plane, the more people have suffered from their mistakes, the more painful it will be for them. As a matter of fact, since we are on the topic of politics, someone that we respect very much through its spiritual messages, it's Camille. Camille, who writes through the medium Raul Teixeira, that most of us know. And he says that sometimes when we see people with some disturbing mental diseases, such as schizophrenia, for example, this could have been politicians who, upon arriving the spiritual plane and contemplating the women who have killed themselves because they had nothing to feed their children with, and that politician stole the money from them. Children who grew up without any education, and that politician sees that the robbers and thieves they have become because that money was taken away. And the people who have died because of lack of health resources, and that politician sees all that. The mental guilt, the pain, it is so intense that in order to continue to exist, because he cannot kill himself. No one kills themselves in the spiritual plane. In order for them to continue to exist, they create a parallel world. And that's what the prefix schizo means, to be apart, to create apart, to split. So they create a split world to continue to live. And in that split world, they suffer a lot, but they depart themselves temporarily from reality. So then when they reincarnate, their state of mind influences their chromosomes that will be responsible to carry the genes in which will create this mental disorder such as schizophrenia. And just let me open a parenthesis, this because this is my area of study. There is no conclusive study, scientific study, to say that this gene or that gene causes schizophrenia. There is not even a brain scan that one can look at it and say that this individual has schizophrenia and that individual don't. There is some speculation that the enlargement of the ventricles in our brain could be a sign of schizophrenia, but it's very inconclusive. And that's because this is a spirit disorder that reflects on the machine and not the other way around.
Excellent. Julio, what an excellent explanation. Yeah, I can totally see the parallel of somebody who's trying to escape reality or for doing bad things as a corrupt politician in the past. We have time for another question. One more question, right? One last question.
You're the boss.
Oh, man. Thank you. How far are we from truly understanding the concept of perfect happiness?
Well, in Spiritism, we learn that everything in nature is evolving. Charles Darwin brought us the origin of species, interestingly enough, after the publication of the Spirit's book in 1865, in which he argues that all things are evolving, and complex organisms are evolving from more simple organisms. There is a whole debate right now. It's occurring. We are living through very interesting periods in our scientific era because the knowledge that the powerful microscopes are bringing to us is really changing our concepts of how truly these statements are. It's fascinating. And but the premises is that everything is evolving, organically. So simpler organisms will develop to more complex organisms. And what we learn in Spiritism is that not only the biological machine is evolving, but also the spiritual being is evolving. So one might say that each species and each realm of nature serve a purpose in order for the development of the spiritual intellect, instinct, and morality. This is a very deep and long subject I'm trying to summarize as much as possible. So we learn that the thinking being that we are today went through different steps in nature in order to arrive in where we find ourselves today. And we went through the mineral stage, through the vegetable realm, and to the animal realm, and we are finally in the human realm. And we are evolving ourselves to the spiritual realm. But the thing is, we are way much closer to the animal kingdom in comparison to the angelical kingdom. This is why we sometimes want to do something, but we do what we want to stop doing it. And the things that we want to do, we can't, because our animal instinct predominates our spiritual being, still. So we're very far. So what is the distance? How is it? The question was how far we are from understanding perfect happiness. Well, because we're so close to our animal kingdom, our animal nature, The animals are as far from the human nature as we are to the angelical nature, to the angelical kingdom. We are very far from understanding what truly perfect happiness is, because that perfect happiness consists of knowing everything and being everything. Let me just discuss the first part because we are out of time. What is to know everything? You know, there are so many branches of science. So let's say I want to be a eye doctor. Now, for me to be an eye doctor, I have first to go to elementary school, then I go to high school. I apply to college. After 4 years of college, I apply to medical school. After medical school, I do 3 years of residency. And when I have my license to practice, I know the material, but I'm very new in the market. I don't have much experience because I did not have yet many clients. But in order for me to become an expert in the eye itself, and there are many different parts of the area in which people become experts, it takes me at least another 40 years. And I'm just talking about a section of an organ, which is in a section of our body. Just imagine all the other sciences out there in which I have to know everything about. Astronomy, biology, zoology, botany, geology. These are all different sciences that I would know everything about. And that's what we spiritists consider what Christ is. We are so far from understanding what Christ is. What we know of Christ, it's what our minds could absorb. He only showed to us what we could comprehend. But this is a such enlightened, evolved individual that we are far from understanding his capabilities. So to know what true happiness is, we are very far because we are still taking our baby steps towards the ladder of evolution. Because in this ladder of evolution, we are walking towards the infinite. And we as spirits will never equate ourselves with God in knowledge. This is why it's infinite, this progress. However, we don't have to wait until we get to a perfect stage to experience peace. I think I already covered this subject. We experience peace but when the minute we make the decision to turn ourselves away from the deeper part of the cave to the entrance of the cave. In other words, when we start fulfilling our obligations.
That was awesome. Julio, thank you so very much. I'm going to ask you to say any final comments that you want to discuss, if there are any initiatives that you'd like to promote, and then say our final prayer. Before that, I have two announcements to make. The first announcement is that our 15th US Spiritist Symposium is coming up. The 15th. It's going to be on June 5th and June 6th, between 2 p.m. and 5:30 Eastern Time. Mediums, 5:30 Eastern Time. Mediums and mediumship. So, and again, it's a celebration of the 150th anniversary of the Mediums book. So you can watch live. Great event. I mean, for those who have watched those events in the past, always there's so much to learn from the symposium. So everybody is invited to our 15th symposium in June. And my next announcement is continuing our series of lectures. Next week, we're going to have Vicente Pessoa, Dr. Vicente Pessoa, and he's going to discuss another very interesting topic: plurality of inhabited worlds from Flammarion to the present time. Very interesting topic. Stay tuned for our series of lectures. Again, Julio, the floor is yours again. Any final comments? And of course, in a final prayer, please.
My final comment is that I would kindly ask everyone to be very careful on whether you get on from where you gather your information. We are living tough times when it comes to the informational war. And this is so important because depending on what kind of information you receive, it shapes your thought, and your thoughts will shape your emotions. So be very careful. In order for us to have discernment, which means the ability to choose right from wrong, we have to read, reflect, study. And if we are spiritists, if we have benefited so much from this philosophy, the least that we can do is to propagate it rightfully through words, through our actions. In order for us to do that, we should really understand what it's all about, the natural consequences of being a spiritist. So, those are my final words, with much wish of peace to everyone. And we ask the supreme intelligence of the universe to give us all courage in order for us to fulfill our obligations in life. And most importantly, we ask you at this time that you provide the stimulus, the strength, the wisdom to everyone who is endowed with power in order for them to serve the common good. So be it.
Be it. Thank you, Julio. Many blessings for everybody.